Welcome to Sassy Mama's Expert Chat on how not to raise people pleasers. I am Kristen, the marketing manager at Sassy Mama, and today I'm here with Zanthe Ng, the whole school counselor at Nexus International School. Today we are excited to talk about everything you wanted to know about people pleasing, including common behaviors, traits, and risk factors, plus tips to help your child grow from the inside and glow from the outside. Before I turn it over to Zanthe, I'd like to take a moment to remind everyone to put yourself on mute so we can clearly hear our speaker. Feel free to keep your cameras on. We love to see your faces. After the presentation, there'll be an opportunity for questions. If you have any, you can submit them by privately messaging me in the Zoom chat function throughout the presentation, and I will read them aloud at the end of the presentation for Zanthe to answer. All questions will be anonymous. Thanks so much. Zanthe, over to you to introduce yourself and kick us off.
Hi, thank you, Christine. Hi, everyone. My name is Zanthe, and I have been in the counseling practice since 2013. I am a licensed counselor, psychotherapist, certified clinical trauma specialist, and certified stress management consultant. At Nexus, I support children from the age of 4 all the way to the age of 18 for the IB learners. So for today, I'll be sharing with you what people-pleasing looks like and how we could prevent our children from becoming a people-pleaser. Here are the key points to what we'll be covering today: the common traits of people-pleasers, how they usually think and feel, how people-pleasing usually comes about, the act of getting people to like you as a way to feel safe, or what we call fawning, can be explained as a trauma response. Certain factors can lead children to be more susceptible to developing people-pleasing tendencies, and some ways to help your child feel enough inside so that they can be in charge of their emotional well-being on the outside. When we chronically try really hard to please others, we never get to learn if we would be accepted just as we are. We receive approval and often praise from others for our great efforts, but it also leaves us uncertain about whether our genuine self would be enough, not to mention it is very exhausting. Many people who chronically put other people's needs first without regards for their own also typically feel a sense of disconnection and non-belonging. It is lonely caretaking for everyone else but yourself. So these common traits, if you have noticed, they come from a fear of losing relationships. Efforts and self-sacrifice are made to put others first, as there is a fear of having others being mad at you, fear of others seeing you as being difficult or selfish, the fear of being judged negatively or offending someone else. It is a common way that people automatically try to make others feel more comfortable at the expense of themselves. Usually people aren't even aware that they are doing this shrinking behavior, which is what we call how people pleasers act small to avoid conflict. In fact, you may have been taught to downplay your strength, be quiet, focus on other people, or even complimenting others just to make social interactions go more smoothly. Well, the unfortunate con of this acting small behavior, the true you doesn't get a chance to shine. And when you get used to stuffing yourself in a box, you take up less space than you deserve, and your self-respect suffers. Acting small makes you feel small too. Some of these ways of acting small include apologizing when you've done nothing wrong, downplaying your accomplishments or skills, complimenting the other person a lot. So many people I work with are often confused about what's going on with how they are feeling before we uncover the culprit, which is people-pleasing. People-pleasing is the behavior of putting other people's needs before your own. Now, this comes from a state of predominantly anxiety. It is one of the underlying habitual patterns that result in a number of painful emotions like those that's described here. Anxiety when you act like your true self, worry about being judged, and sadness because you're just not getting enough of your needs met. In the short term, people-pleasing seems to solve these emotions. For example, if you're worried about asking for what you want and you just keep quiet, like a people pleaser. Instead, then in the short term, perhaps you wouldn't feel anxious because that is already meeting what you need. However, in the long term, you continue to feel anxious whenever you want something because you haven't yet learned that it is okay to ask. So people pleasing is understandable because it makes painful emotions reduce in the short term, but it is harmful overall because it perpetuates these same feelings in the long term. It's kind of like drinking in the morning to solve a hangover. In the short term, the hungover person might feel relief from the pain that they are in because they are continuing drinking. But in the long term, they are only making the hangover and pain even worse. So what causes people pleasing? When individuals have experiences of feeling different or not good enough, they often adapt themselves by trying to become more acceptable to others. One of the ways we adapt to such stressful situation is by learning to put others' needs ahead of our own, also known as people pleasing. So humans also learn to do what is expected of them, what is rewarded, what seems helpful, at least in the short term. There are a lot of psychological theory behind behavior, how people tend to act in a way when they feel good about something. So for example, like for children, when they say or make a joke to their friends, for example, and their friends receive it, is well received, the chances of them repeating this behavior is small. So for this reason, many individuals learn people pleasing when they are in situation when they had to or were expected to care for others, be it physically or emotionally, or when they are in contexts that reinforce putting their own needs last. If you ever experience hurt, bullying, a broken heart, or rejection, it's easy to understand why children tend to choose to go along with what others want. We want people to like us. We all desire to be accepted and to belong. These are very basic human needs. The primary reason we give ourselves up is a fear of negative consequences that can have a significant impact on our lives. For children, they do not have as many cognitive filters like adults. To them, they either feel good or they feel bad. So when they feel bad, they develop their own coping methods to deal with it. So they would assess the nearest coping mechanism and using themselves as the fastest way to deal with bad feelings, especially when it involves dealing with other people. I'd like to explain a little bit more about fawning, which is a trauma response. So when our brain is still developing, we will do anything to avoid danger. The fawn response is to seek safety by merging with the perpetrator. So as children, when we were young, if you could bring yourself back a little bit more years, we do what we are told, even if it isn't what is right or good for us. Fawning requires knowledge of whoever is hurting you and the skill to know how to appease them. Fawning results in the individual attempting to please, to keep the peace, make excuses, or work on eggshells to avoid conflicts out of fear of escalating the situation. The one in this submissive position with less control develops a bond to the dominant figure in order to survive the situation. So you might have heard of your children, they might have formed friendship groups, and there will usually be one or two who are the more vocal, the one that dominates the friendship. Usually in healthy relationship, that is quite a common trait. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that if you notice that your child were to start to go beyond and above to attempt to please, make excuses, or out of fear of not wanting to be out of the friendship group, then that is something that we want to look at. In fawning, your brain thinks that you'll be left alone and helpless. The brain's response is then to attach yourself to a person so that they think they need you. This can lead you to do things to make others happy, to cause less of a threat to yourself. For children, this can be defined as a need to be a good kid in order to escape mistreatment by an abusive or neglectful parent. This could mean in relationships, you are consistently ignoring your own needs, values, and boundaries conform to what you believe others expect of you. What are some factors that put a child more at risk for developing people-pleasing tendencies? People-pleasing is the sacrifice of oneself to be liked, loved, and accepted by other people. So children who grew up in a home where they felt that love and acceptance needed to be earned will learn that they're not enough and that they have to put other people before themselves to be worthy. We look at the environment where a child is growing up in, usually when we are helping children. So very often we see a pattern of invalidating environments where children's feelings were dismissed, ignored, criticized, or not taken seriously. So these include being in an environment where the child's internal experience were denied. The child may have learned to deny their own experiences too. Child may be caught dramatic for expressing themselves. Child may have learned to doubt or ignore their own feelings. The child may have been given the message that he or she was bad for expressing emotions, or the child may have learned to question or criticize themselves for having emotions. So all this leads to a message that the brain continues to tell oneself that other people's emotions are more important than their own, and they have to appease others in order to be validated. I put together some questions over here that you could ask your child from time to time, and I would encourage you to repeat these questions often. Well, maybe not at once. I'm not expecting you to follow it like, from A to Z like a guide, but these are some questions that I'd like you to ask your child from time to time, whenever you can, be it in the car or be it like during dinner or any outings that you have. These are starters to help validate our children and also to boost self-esteem and self-worth. Also, I think we don't want them to doubt their emotions. So you could ask them what makes sense about what they're feeling at that point. Children should also know that it is perfectly human to have different emotions and that they're not being bad for having different feelings like anger, sadness, especially. So in the course of my work with children, I gathered very often that children have the perception that they are bad kids for having bad emotions. I will always then psychoeducate both parents and their children that different emotions are normal and essential as part of our nervous system. The management of the emotion is something to work on. It is true that sometimes our children may need to be given different strategies on how to express emotions that are difficult, but it is not the classification of emotions, whether it is something good or bad, that we want to be criticizing on. Children who are shamed for making mistakes or feel unaccepted for having a different range of emotions would tend to believe that if I am perfect, then I'll be loved and accepted. So this creates fear of making mistakes and trying to avoid situations where they could make mistakes. Many of us as adults, we may develop a highly critical voice in our head, judging and criticizing our every move, thinking that if we were to catch our imperfection first, we can prevent being criticized by someone else. So to manage this, we need to challenge our internal overly critical voice, have the courage to make mistakes and expose ourselves to situations where we might fail. Likewise for your children, where they have you to guide them on what to do in such situations. Actually, it is also very helpful when you find yourself in difficult situations, you share with your child what you are going to do, what are some of the steps that you can take. Though it can be uncomfortable finding ourselves in difficult situations or allowing our kids to actually make mistakes, children can benefit from watching and learning from you on how to deal with challenging situations where you can be imperfect too. Actually, I think in fact, there's no such thing as perfection or by any means in order even to attempt to become perfect at something. So one would have to do something over and over again imperfectly. When we expect perfectionism from ourselves and others, I would think that we rob ourselves of truly experiencing life, learning how to overcome mistakes and learning to move on. So very often parents they want to know, they will ask me, what are the elements that help in building relationships for children? Is it spending more time listening to them? And what else? What else should I be doing? At this point, I'd like to share that I believe there are no right or wrong parenting style, as I always believe. There are outcomes from the parenting styles that parents have chosen. So 4 areas that are important to a child psychologically, we are looking at safety, certainty, clarity, predictability. Does your child know and have certainty, clarity and predictability about the environment that they're in? Do they know what would happen if they make certain choices and are aware that there are natural consequences that follow, not consequences that depend on your mood? Before the age of 11 years old, learning is done through experience and repetition. With consistency in these 4 areas, a child will be able to learn that they can be in control of their behavior, have good attachment, increase the sense of self, and therefore having less of the perception that they need to please others in order to be validated or accepted. You are the first relationship your child has in their life. How they validate themselves in relation to someone else depends on what is shown to them. When your child makes mistakes, is there room to make errors and recover, not depending on your mood or something that is constantly changing? For those who have noticed your child displaying any traits of possible people-pleasing, you can help them to challenge people-pleasing assumption, learning how to say hard things such as no, accepting their feelings even though it can be difficult or it can be uncomfortable, building self-compassion that, well, not everyone is going to like you, and that is really okay and normal. So some of the things that I'd like to add on about how you can actually help your child in order to, for those who have already developed certain tendencies of people pleasing, is by inserting what we call a delay between the urge to people please. So you could help your child to delay the urge by having to respond to a request or text right away between that urge and them actually doing it. It can be as small as a 5-minute delay as you build that muscle of sitting with the new feeling of refraining from people pleasing. It can also be writing down what you will want to say, noticing what you want in a situation, even though you're not ready to ask for it. So another strategy for your child is to start speaking out or saying no in the domain of life that is less scary for them. So people pleasing is a very hard thing to stop once you start getting to the cycle. But there are ways that you could help your child, which is by helping them to say no in less scary situation. So think of refraining from pleasing people as a muscle, much like a physical muscle. You can start to build it, and once you get used to weightlifting at one level, then you can move on to something heavier. It's just like how you're building the muscle. With this, I come to the end of my sharing. And once again, thank you for being with me. Back to you, Christine.
Great. Thank you, Xander, for this great overview on how not to raise people pleasers. We've had some questions come in already, but as a reminder, if you have something you'd like to ask, please put it in the Zoom chat function and we will do our best to get to all the questions. The first question that we've had come in is, can you comment on how people pleasing might show up differently in boys and girls?
I think it's a very interesting question. To date, I think there hasn't been a lot of research done between gender, but from the course of my work with children, at least, we do see it more commonly in girls than boys. Why? Because I think girls at the point, even younger children, they tend to have the tendency to form different friendship groups. And these friendship groups tend to involve more people. So with more stakeholders in the group that they are in, then there's naturally more things, or rather more criteria, more ideas, and more people to deal with. And wanting to be accepted in a particular group, there are more things that they might give up of themselves in order to feel accepted. However, something very interesting is that I have heard of, which is for adults, men, they have shared that some of them do tend to go into people-pleasing mode, especially with wives and spouses, because that kind of made their life easier, actually.
Great, thank you. Another question is there a typical age that people start people-pleasing, or sorry, that people-pleasing starts to present itself in children, or can it develop at any time? Are younger kids more susceptible compared to teens, or do we see it across all age groups, and how do we navigate that?
So before the age of 11, it is what we call when the brain is still developing. There isn't a lot of cognitive filter at that age. So children tend to, in terms of neuroplasticity, children tend to develop coping methods that marks the pattern that they would carry on through the rest of their lives. I would say that typically we do see people-pleasing tendencies very often in children when they enter school age, when there's bigger social groups that they have to conform with. So between the age of 7 to 11, that's where we tend to see a lot of tendencies coming out from children displaying such traits. And that is also the critical stage, by the way, that they will determine whether this is a method that they will need to hold on to survive in other social relationships as they grow up the rest of their life, which is why before the age of 11 is a very critical stage where we could also help them to mold and how they could be away, or rather develop ways to be away from this people-pleasing tendency.
Great. I have a follow-up question on that. So after the age of 11, is there hope in changing this pattern, or what does it really take to change the pattern when they're older?
Right. Yeah, a very interesting question. So if I were to share a little bit more in terms of neuropsychology, our brain has a lot of neurons in the brain, which is, think of it like a muscle memory. So what happens is that the more you do something, the more the neurons get joined together and they form habits and ways of what we call coping. So think of it like nowadays when you wouldn't remind yourself consciously that, oh, I have to close the door of the fridge after I opened it. It comes naturally because it becomes a muscle memory. So likewise for children who have developed people-pleasing tendency after the age of 11, they can still be taught different strategies and how to rework coping, but it will take time. Just like any adults, if you want to change coping strategies, develop or expand new ways on doing that, it will take time. The good news is that for the younger you are, the faster you would be able to actually mold that neuroplasticity in the brain and alter the way how you cope with situation and people.
Fascinating. We've had a lot of more questions come in that are really interesting, so hopefully we can get to them all. The next one that I have is, hi, my 3-year-old really wants us to be happy all the time. And if we aren't, says, are you happy? And seems to think it's her job to make us happy. What can we do to stop her from feeling like it's our job to make us happy?
Yeah, I think, thank you for your observation on a child on that. Yes. So one thing that we like to actually validate a child is by asking them questions. So you could actually also check with your child, like what makes you happy? What are some of the things you enjoy doing with us as a family? What are some of the things that you feel really happy when you are as a child? So a lot of times parents tend to think like perhaps doing certain activities would help to benefit the child, or think that that is how the child will feel happy. I always encourage parents to check back with their child, because we want to do things, we want to talk about things that's of relevancy to them, not to us all the time. So one way you could actually do is by checking in with them, checking with your child, what is it about, what does it make you happy when we are doing things together? You can find out more.
Great, that's super helpful. Here's another kind of specific question. Is making my kids say please, thank you, sorry every time that she requests for something or makes a mistake a potential for raising a people pleaser?
I think those are manners. I like to think that the P's and Q's are the kind of manners that we want to teach in our children. I would think that the only thing that we want to be mindful of is whether all this done, whether your child will perceive that when they say this P's and Q's, whether do they perceive it as causing the other person, or rather making the other person feel happy and less angry with themselves. I think there's a differentiation to be made between helping your child face that their natural consequences of things and what is expected of them, versus whether are they doing all these things in order to make people feel happy about them or view them as that they are a good kid. So for example, I had a parent who shared with me before about how unintentionally she would tell her child that, oh, if you do not say thank you or please, people are going to think that you're a bad kid. People are going to think that you have no manners. People are going to think that you are this and that. So that is sending a signal message to the child that if I don't do this, people would think that I am not good enough. So it's what kind of message you're sending across to your child when you ask them to practice their P's and Q's.
Great, that's fascinating. Here's another question that we have. Do older siblings tend to have a tendency to be more people-pleasing than younger siblings?
I do not think there is any correlationship at this point regarding about siblings, birth order, and people-pleasing tendency. But I suspect that what you might be thinking of is whether older sibling, because they are older, in a sense, they do have more emotional maturity than the younger ones. So it might be in their part of their emotional maturity to take care of the younger one. So they might do things that, actually maybe being nice and kind to the younger ones. So not all kinds and nice action of putting others or the younger sibling is a people-pleasing tendency. There is a difference between being kind and being a people pleaser. So the older sibling might come from a place of being kind if he or she is not compromising or self-sacrificing on his or her own needs, and that leaves that child feeling drained, feeling unhappy that his or own needs are not met.
That's interesting. I think I could also see it where, a younger child wants to people please to an older child so that, they like them. How do you manage that kind of relationship between siblings so that they don't kind of become each other's people pleasers or kind of expect that from one another or try for that?
I think we would definitely want siblings to be nice to one another. But I think at the same time, it is very critical that every individual child knows that they have a voice to their own needs and they don't have to sacrifice their own needs in order to make the other person happy for the sake of being accepted or validated. I think that is the key that we would want to be mindful of when we have children, siblings interacting with one another.
Great. We have another question, and this person is curious about people pleasing and neurodivergence. Can children on the spectrum be people pleasers too? And what does that look like? Is there any differences on how you might approach breaking that cycle with a neurodivergent child?
So when we look at children with different, with neurodiversity, it is actually the same as children who doesn't have neurodiversity, because what we are looking at is their basic needs, their own emotional needs. Of course, children with neurodiversity, they might find it harder to express their own needs and their own desire. So they can still become a people pleaser, but this will come from the experience of them interacting with the environment around them. So this is regardless of whether the child is a neurodivergent one or not, because it really depends on whether the adult has given them the experience and perception that their needs are not important, that they are invalidated, that they have to put others first before themselves. The challenge I see with kids with neurodivergent is that probably they would need more work in terms of learning how to express their own needs to adults around them. And also, of course, things like saying no, because fitting in social situation might require extra work from them to begin with.
That makes sense. Here's another question that we've had come in. How can we encourage a child to overcome a fear of failure and constant need for perfection?
Okay, this is something very common actually. See that a lot in our work with children. I think that first and foremost, we want to find out about what is the child perception of failure. When there is a fear for something, usually it comes with anxiety. So what are they anxious about? What is the consequences they think would happen if they were to fail? So I have children telling me things like, well, if I were to not do well in this, my mom is going to be upset with me. So their fear is of disappointing their parent. And the constant need for perfection, again, it comes from a place of who are they actually showing this perfection for? Who are they trying to please in terms of like, who are they trying to show that they are perfect? What's going to happen when they feel imperfect? Why are they uncomfortable sitting with the feeling of imperfection? I think we want to get all this sorted out, and then we could start working on in terms of like strengthening self-esteem, strengthening self-worth. So there are some activities that we do with children. For example, we get them to identify one thing that they are good at doing every day. So in the previous slides, I shared about some of the questions that you could ask your child, like, what are you good at doing? What do you like about yourself? So all these are validating questions to help build up their sense of self, and also to acknowledge that there isn't a need to constantly be perfect all the time. They are who they are.
Great. What are some practical tips to encourage compromising amongst siblings or family members without the feeling of caving in, sacrificing their needs, and honoring boundaries?
So what are some of the things that actually goes on between the siblings? Perhaps we are talking about, there could be, I'm not sure in this case, are we looking at someone who wants to do something and the others would have to compromise and meet the needs of that? I think that's very common in family, especially when everyone has their own need. When I work with families, I usually encourage parents to get their child to determine what they want to do for the weekend, for example, and then turn taking comes in. So morning, we could be doing something that someone likes, and in the afternoon, we could take turn for someone else to request what they want to do. And of course, I think it's very important that we might not be able to meet the needs all the time. Your child might want to, go out to the sea to do boating or do, golfing or anything, but we might not be able to meet the needs all the time. So it is still important for them to voice out their needs, let them know that their needs are heard. And then that's the next part, is how you actually manage, about telling them the expectation of how we can do this weekend. But I hear you, this is something you really like to do. And you could, of course, also thank them for sharing that. It's really nice to hear you sharing what you want. It's just that we might have to take this to another day, things like that.
Great. Here's another question that's come through. When does trying to be a good kid or not disappointing cross the line of being people-pleasing? Is there some level of people-pleasing that is healthy or natural?
Okay. I think this goes back to the question of whether it is, whether the child is trying to be nice or trying to be pleasing. So there are some signs that is people-pleasing, some symptoms and some signs of it. When the child feel like there isn't a choice, that they have to do something because they got no choice, otherwise someone would be very upset, angry with it. It feels bad to the child after they have done it. It feels like they would, worry about it later because they are unsure whether it is something that they should have done, but they did it anyway. And of course, it's not in line with them of what they are doing. Now, there are children out there who are naturally kind and nice. They think of other people. I think that is okay, and that is healthy as well, because we teach children empathy and all that. So when does it cross the line of people pleasing? Is when it feels bad to them. They are exhausted, they are drained, their own needs are not met. They feel like I don't really want to do this, but I did it anyway because everyone else is doing it and I have to fit in. Now that is when it crosses the line of becoming a people pleaser. It usually feels bad when you people please all the time, or when you step into people pleasing.
Great, thanks for elaborating on that distinction. If we notice this behavior in our kids, how can we best work with our school to support breaking the people-pleasing cycle?
Yeah, I think having a professional, a counselor to work with a child, that would be something that would be helpful, because there are a lot of things to uncover, and there are ways that you could actually also discuss with either the school counselor or some therapists outside to come up with a common strategy that would help your child. So some of the common strategy that we often see, being in school context or being outside, would be practicing and we call it reversing what the muscle memory has been done. So like I mentioned earlier on in my talk, things like creating a delay. So this is the fundamental step that we do with all the strategies that we do with all children. It has been very helpful. Teaching your kid how to have a pause between meeting their urge to please others and acting on it. So it's like, for example, if a teen or younger one, they find themselves having to respond to a friend who constantly texts them very late at night, they have the urge, okay, I need to reply now. Or maybe for yourself, to reply my boss immediately right now, in order to please my boss. Try to practice taking a delay. So that could be like 5 minutes. Now, one important thing about any intervention, any strategies that you have come up with for your child is not to jump the gun. Think of it as a rubber band. If you were to stretch it too far to the other end, it's going to snap back and you're going to be left feeling, your child is going to be left feeling, okay, this doesn't work. This strategy doesn't work. Now, what you want to do is taking small baby steps. So creating a 5 minutes delay, for example, and then you work on to increase that delay of time in between. And it could be also be writing down what you want to say to the person, even though you might not have the courage to say in real life. So we work out step by step in that sense. But yeah, definitely connecting with a professional, be able to help your child to understand better, unwind some of the preconceived notion, sometimes what we call error thinking that the child might have developed. For example, if I don't do this, the whole world is going to hate me. So this kind of black and white thinking is something that professional will be able to help the child to reverse as well.
Great. And we have one final question, which I think is a great one to end on. Can you recommend any further reading on this?
Yeah, I think that some articles online, read about fawning, Fawning. That is a great way to help you understand why the brain goes into people pleasing as a result of the experience it received from the environment and the people around. So fawning is a good way for you to start reading regarding people pleasing, and you will have a lot of information that you can find on that.
Great. I'm sure lots of us will be looking at that later. Thank you so much, Zanthe and Nexus International School, and to all of you today for joining our Sassy Mama Expert Chat. We hope you've all learned some useful information to help support you in your parenting journey. Look out for a follow-up email with a link to rewatch today's presentation, as well as an opportunity to provide feedback on today's event as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.